even if it ended today, we've now seen markets rise in a way that nobody predicted 2 weeks ago. And so whether they will return back to where they were, I think is really questionable.
Well, the president of the National Farmers Union, Tom Bradshaw, joins us now. Good morning.
Good morning.
We've just heard from Dom about the link between what's going on in Iran and fertilizer. How concerned are you about what you're seeing?
Well, it's the whole fossil fuel market. Energy is such an integral part of producing the country's food, whether that's fertilizer, whether it's natural gas going into heating our glass houses, or whether it's just the red diesel that goes into our tractors or the fuel that goes into lorries, which collects the milk, collects the grain, and is part of the processing right the way through the supply chain. So the whole energy complex has a real impact, and it's very, very inflationary when we're seeing the uncertainty that we are at the moment. With fertilizer directly, this is a critical time of year now to be applying fertilizer to growing crops and to grass. The arable sector, which is growing wheat and barley and crops like that, tends to have more fertilizer in stock and probably has around 2/3 of the fertilizer that we need already on farm. But the livestock sector, producing milk, but also sheep and cattle, has a lot less fertilizer stored on farm. Just it doesn't have the capacity to store that product, and probably only has a third of the fertilizer that it requires. Now, this is really important when we've had a really dry summer last year. Forage stocks are running low. And the confidence of the whole sector, whether that's an arable farmer, a livestock farmer, or somebody producing horticulture, this cost inflation on farm is very real. It's being felt now. And if those businesses don't believe they're going to be able to sell the produce at a profit, then there'll be really big questions asked about whether they go ahead and plant the crops this spring, whether they decide that they're going to continue producing from those glass houses. And it's that whole energy complex which is driving this uncertainty further at the moment.
There's a lot to unpick in what you've just said. I want to just be very clear. Are those farms that don't currently have enough fertilizer able to buy any at the moment? Is there any available?
Well, yesterday prices were withdrawn from the market. So that would mean that there's actually not an ability to establish a contract to buy the fertilizer. Now, this will hopefully settle down. But I mean, yesterday, what we heard from President Trump, late evening yesterday, still doesn't give any clarity. 1 minute, it feels like the attacks on Iran are nearly over. The next minute, there's huge uncertainty around whether any oil is going to go through the Strait of Hormuz or not. And that is the critical determinant here. Now, our oil or our red diesel doesn't typically come from that part of the world. It probably comes from Norway or from North America. But once the whole global trade is impacted, then the demand dynamics shift right the way around the globe, and the impact on prices and the uncertainty of availability is there for everybody.
You mentioned just previously that those farmers who are looking at the price of fertilizer, the availability of it, and wondering about the price that they'll be able to sell for may consider not bothering at all. What impact would that have on the market here in the UK?
Well, I mean, it's a slightly longer term impact, but if you think of those cereal crops, the harvest would normally be in August and September. If they can't see a way to making a profit because of high fertilizer prices, low global grain markets, and just overall confidence and uncertainty, a lack of cash flow on the back of 2 really challenging years, then they're going to be questioning whether just to look after the 2/3 of the farm that they have enough fertilizer for, and that typically that wheat was already planted in September and October, and they may not decide to grow the malting barley or the spring oats that would be put in the ground now because the risk is just too high. The knock-on impact further down the line is that we're even more exposed to global markets. And I think the real message here is about the resilience of domestic food production. You were highlighting there that we no longer produce any fertilizer from raw ingredients here in the UK. We're completely exposed to the global market. And this geopolitical uncertainty has been going on now for over 4 years with the Ukraine crisis. And I think it's a really stark reminder that we have to have a plan for how we're going to produce food for the 70 million people living on an island. And the resilience of our domestic industry is absolutely critical to that.
And I mean, people listening to that might say, well, look, we can just import food. We don't need to worry about it. I mean, a lot of our food comes from import markets anyway. We can keep buying from abroad. We don't need to worry too much.
But we don't have any control over those import markets. And the reality is they will always feed their own population before they feed us. And when we see this geopolitical uncertainty continuing, we've heard of food price inflation being one of the key drivers of inflation over the last 4 years, ever since the Ukraine crisis. Energy is intrinsically linked to that. But we also then see climate change. And when you look at the impacts down in North Africa and in southern Spain, where we import a lot of our fresh fruit and vegetables from, there is no resilience within that food system. And I think taking control, and imports will be part of a safe, secure supply chain. But I think having a resilient domestic production is absolutely central. And the government need to have a plan and prioritize food production in this country.
Well, you mentioned there the Russia-Ukraine war. There will be many people listening to this who remember what happened to food prices during that time. I mean, some of which have not seemingly come down since. Are we talking about food inflation reaching double figures again, a repeat of the same situation, or are we talking about something worse this time round?
I think so much of this depends how long the crisis goes on for. Even if it ended today, we've now seen markets rise in a way that nobody predicted 2 weeks ago. And so whether they will return back to where they were, I think is really questionable. Often once you've seen inflation, it doesn't come back down to previous levels. Electricity costs are a classic example of that. I think we really worry at the moment that this is the start of the next inflationary cycle on food production. We're seeking urgent talks with government to look at what solutions could be put in place to try to mitigate the worst of those impacts, because our members as farmers and food producers can't afford this inflationary increase. Consumers can't afford this inflationary increase at the retail shelf, yet we need to make sure we continue producing the country's food. So back 4 or 5 years ago, we had the resilience of the old EU support scheme paying into farmers' businesses. And that was sort of brought some resilience, but that has now been completely removed. It's now all earned income for delivering public services. And it means that farm businesses are more exposed to volatile markets than they ever have been. And I think at this moment, we need to be looking at how we can bring stability and confidence so that everyone continues to produce the food that's desperately needed.
Well, Tom, do come back and tell us how those talks with the government go. I'm sure lots of our listeners will be interested to hear the result of those. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That is Tom Bradshaw there from the National Farmers Union.
Start of next inflationary cycle is their fear, is the line for people to remember. And it's an obvious point, but I was thinking about as you're having that conversation, is when inflation is 10% and then it goes down to 2%, the 10% doesn't go away.
Yeah.
So the price has gone up by 10%, then it just goes up by 2% on top of the 10%. So once you get the inflation, it sticks. So the butter that was 10% more expensive stays 10% more expensive.
I was thinking about butter because it's so expensive now, so much more than it was
and it's
before.
never going to deflate, is it? It's never going to suddenly drop 30p. It's just going to be, it maybe only go up 10p rather than 20p next time. And so everything is always cumulative, isn't it? I mean, it's kind of an obvious point, but when you listen to that, that's going to be a problem for people who are already concerned about what the cost of their shop is.
Yeah, and the resilience point is so important here too. I mean, both from Dom and there, in that conversation, you can hear the sort of concern about the fact that we are completely reliant on international markets. And the one thing we learned during the COVID pandemic was that being reliant on international markets for things at that particular moment, it was PPE, personal protective equipment, but it left us very exposed. And it also left us exposed to huge rocketing prices on something that we desperately needed.
And why is America going home? Because America is pretty self-reliant as a country because it's massive and it's got vast access to internal markets that provide a lot of their stuff.